Let me read to you a passage from the second chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 13 to 22. It's the Gospel for the feast of the dedication of the Lateran Basilica on November the 9th. St. John writes, "Since the Passover of the Jews was near, Jesus went up to Jerusalem. He found in the temple area those who sold oxen, sheep, and doves, as well as the money changers seated there. He made a whip out of cords and drove them all out of the temple area with the sheep and oxen, and spilled the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. And to those who sold doves he said, 'Take these out of here, and stop making my Father's house a marketplace.' His disciples recalled the words of Scripture, 'Zeal for your house will consume me.' At this, the Jews answered and said to him, 'What sign can you show us for doing this?' Jesus answered and said to them, 'Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up.' The Jews said, 'This temple has been under construction for 46 years, and you will raise it up in 3 days?' But he was speaking about the temple of his body. Therefore, when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they came to believe the Scripture and the word Jesus had spoken." It's from John chapter 2, verse 13 to 22, for the feast of the dedication of the Lateran Basilica in Rome. On this day, November the 9th, the Universal Church celebrates the feast of the dedication of the Lateran Basilica in Rome. Every diocese commemorates the dedication of its own cathedral. For instance, in the Australian Ordo of the Liturgical Year, the date of the dedication of every diocesan cathedral in the country is noted. Why is this? The cathedral is the place of the bishop of the diocese. The word see is from the Latin sedes, seat. Cathedral is from the Greek cathedra, seat or chair. It is the chair of authority from which he teaches, preaches, and governs, near to the altar at which he celebrates the Eucharist and dispenses the sacraments. It is the locale from which he exercises his unifying ministry as a successor of the apostles. Within the diocese, where the Catholic Church is present locally, Christ as pastor, teacher, and high priest of his people is especially present and active in the person of the bishop, and where the bishop has his chair, his see, his cathedral. With good reason, then, the local church celebrates the dedication of the cathedral. It is above all a form of celebrating communion with the local bishop, and through him the presence of Christ, who creates and sustains his church. But of course, the local church, which is to say, the Catholic faithful gathered around their bishop, makes present the prior and fundamental ecclesial reality, which is the universal church. This it is able to do by being in full communion with the Church Catholic, gathered with the successor of Peter. Christ founded his church on the visible rock of Simon Peter, and his church was to be brought to all the nations. Christ's church, his disciples gathered around Peter and the apostles, were charged with the mission of going to the whole world and making disciples of all the nations. Thus, the Catholic Church is prior to the founding of any local diocesan church, and the Catholic Church is made present, manifested, and enriched by the local Catholic Church. Communion with the local and legitimate Catholic bishop is expressed in the celebration of the dedication of the local cathedral. But for the local church in communion with its bishop to be properly Catholic, it is essential that there be full communion with the universal church, expressed in communion with the successor of Peter, the Bishop of Rome. This is a cardinal point of the Catholic faith. This is why we celebrate every year not only the dedication of the local cathedral, but also the dedication of the Cathedral of St. John Lateran. It is the cathedral of the Diocese of Rome. It is the locale of the chair or see of the Bishop of Rome, from which he governs and teaches and preaches. And with this see, every other chair of the Catholic Church must be in full communion. Christ, as head of the universal Church, is especially present in the chair of Rome, and any chair that loses its communion with the chair of Rome is by that fact separated from full membership in the Catholic Church. To the extent that it lacks this communion, to that extent it fails in Catholicism. That is why in the life of the Christian and in the life of every local church, there is a very important question to be asked. It is, what does Rome say? To disregard this question, to have but a scant interest in it, to think without any reference to it, let alone to be hostile and resistant to it, betrays an un-Catholic course, whose ultimate result, if unchecked, is separation from the universal Church. The authentically Catholic mind is imbued with a love for the See of Rome because of its unique place in the constitution of the Catholic Church, and this by Christ's institution. What the Chair of Rome teaches is the authoritative guide to the life of the Catholic Church, for through that chair the voice of Christ is authoritatively heard in each generation. What Jesus the Master revealed is presented again and again and applied to the age. Christ's doctrine is developed in authentic fashion for the sanctification of the faithful, but it is the chair of Peter which ultimately judges on this. All of this we recognize and renew in our celebration of the feast of the dedication of the Roman Cathedral of St. John Lateran, the chair of the Bishop of Rome. All Christians are called by Christ to be in full communion with this bishop, as he teaches and ministers as Christ's universal vicar, having authority and jurisdiction over the universal Church. So today we think of Christ present in the person of the Pope, the successor of St. Peter, the rock of Christ's Church, the visible foundation of the unity of the universal Church. Christ is the unseen rock of the Church, and the Pope, as his vicar, is its visible rock. To be in communion with Christ and his Church, we must be in communion with the Pope. Our communion ought be heartfelt too. Pope St. Pius X once wrote that it is not possible for the Catholic to be holy if he does not love the Pope. On this feast day, let us note that it is a feast day in the liturgical year. Let us renew that most important element of our Catholic faith, which is our love for and religious obedience to the See of St. Peter, recognizing in the Pope and his teaching the presence and activity of Jesus, the Church's head. Many saints, St. Thomas More is but one example, have died for the doctrine that the Pope is the universal pastor of the Catholic Church. All must recognize this as a divinely intended linchpin of Catholic life.